Iain Dale's Book Club.
You talk about some people compared you with George Best, but said, well, you didn't have the natural talent that maybe he had, but your work rate made you as effective, and you did actually win European Footballer of the Year twice. But you're quite self-deprecating about yourself in this book. Did you ever realise how good you were?
Well, I certainly didn't have the talent of George Best. But, football, thank God for me anyway, is not just about talent. Nothing in life is. So, some of the best, most talented, creative players I've seen in my life, 99% of them threw it away one way or the other. Never. When I say threw it away, I don't mean that in a terrible way. Best didn't throw it away, but he never ever achieved all he could have done because of his lifestyle, which everyone knows about. He was finished at about 27, 28, but when he was 22, 23, he was the best player I'd ever seen, and anyone who'd followed football had ever seen. I mean, since then we've seen Maradona, we've seen Messi just recently, Cruyff. But George Best was the pioneer, and for people like me, I didn't have his ability. There's no doubt about that. But I learned a lot from him. I learned that the commercial side of football was just starting to come in. He took it. George Best took it from a sport into the pop world. It almost married at a time when the pop was massive. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles had left England for tax reasons, but they were still, having number one hits. So, yeah, George Best was the pioneer, and someone said once, don't know which player it was, I wasn't fit to lace his drinks, and I know what they mean. He was a genius, and he was a forerunner for all of the people like myself and who were to come after.
What was the moment when you realised that you could do it in Division 1 as it was then?
A major thing. I went to watch the FA Cup final. I signed on the Monday in 71 of the FA Cup final. Arsenal would end up beating Liverpool 2-1. And my girlfriend, Jean, and myself were fetched with Liverpool, the supporters and all the people who worked there in the offices to watch that. And I watched it, and, I don't know, it was just self-confidence, whatever. I just thought, I could add something to this team. So I think that's the first thing. Any young player, you've got to feel you belong. You can't pretend to feel you belong. You have to have a moment where you think, I can do this. Why can't I do this? I can do this. Once you get over that stage, I think when Bill Shankly put his arm around me after my second training session at Liverpool, bearing in mind all these other players are playing for the country, Emlyn Hughes, Ian Callaghan, John Toshack playing for Wales, you've got Ray Clemens playing for England, and he just said, son, you'll play for England, there's no doubt about it, and I knew I would.
Iain Dale's Book Club.
What setbacks have you had in your career? Any failures? Because we always hear this thing in America, well, you go bankrupt twice and it's just a learning exercise until you then make your million. We don't have that same attitude here. Have you ever got to a point where you've thought, well, that's it, I've failed?
I think when I first left Harvey Nichols and I set up my own agency, that was the biggest sweat ever. Like, I thought I was going to be sick with the stress of it. I didn't fail. I didn't not make money, but I didn't expect it to be so hard. I mean, I was on the board at Harvey Nichols. I remember sort of driving in with my Merc to give it back that day, where you had it parked for you, where you had your clothes allowance, where you had designers who sent you clothes. Everything, all your meals were paid for. It was just a wonderful life. I mean, you worked very hard with it, but by God, everything else was looked after. Suddenly I was getting the tube everywhere, no car, like trying to run the budgets, the financial side of it, and had two very young children. I think Milo was 3 and Verity was 1. And the stress of that, I literally dropped a stone in work and actually just didn't sleep. I genuinely remember 3 nights on the trot not sleeping at all and just thinking, what have I done? And I remember ringing up the MD of Harvey Nichols, and they hadn't replaced me, and going in to see him to say, should I go back? Yeah.
And why didn't you?
He said, anytime you want to come back. And yet I didn't. And I don't know why I didn't. I probably didn't want them to see that I was failing, But I felt I was failing. And then I got spotted for TV, which if I'd been working in a corporation, that would have never happened. And so now I have what Charles Handy once described as a portfolio career. So I have my agency, I do some TV, I have my charity shops, I do lectures, I do some radio, I write books, and it's just like this incredible, wonderful mix.
We have so much in common. I do all of those things.
Do you?
Yeah.
Do you? That's brilliant.
And I think this is
Isn't
an
it?
increasing phenomenon where people will have portfolio
Yeah.
careers. I mean, it sounds terribly grand when you say that,
Yeah.
but actually, I suspect we both have the attention span of a flea.
Totally.
So
What star
therefore,
sign are you?
Cancer.
Oh, I'm my favourite. I always get on with Cancerians. I'm Gemini. All my mates are Cancer.
It's really funny. I'm going to tell you something now, which you'll probably find hilarious. I mean, I've interviewed you a couple of times on the radio before, just sort of over the phone.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time my producer said, "Oh, let's get Mary Portas on." Shall I tell you what my initial reaction
Oh,
was?
God, not a
I was
mousy
thinking,
bitch.
God, that's going to be quite intimidating. I'm a bit frightened of her.
I know.
Do you get a
See?
lot of that?
Yeah, and but I am not. I think the people that really get to know me know I'm not that. I thought I was kind of touched. I had an interview that was done in The Observer by Rachel Cook, who I really rate as a writer, and I love reading her stuff. I wasn't sure I wanted to be the subject of it because she's an incredible writer. But she came in to interview me, and I was just so tired. And the publication came out, and I read it, and she described me, and I was like, I have never had anyone describe me so perfectly. And I can't remember completely the words, but she said she can be a bit controlling and she can be a bit scary, but she's stoic, she's brave, and she's kind. And I was like, yes, that's me. And I kind of like, and I had a little tear. Because I know I can be. And, my kids sometimes say to me, they call me the claw. Do you remember in Toy Story, the claw that comes down? And I'm like, that's terrible. And they went, no, Mum, because if you fall over, the claw also comes down and picks you up.
Iain Dale's Book Club.
I've been thinking a lot recently about Roger Moore. Did you ever meet Roger Moore?
I did, actually, yes. I met him in Michael Winner's house at a book launch of one of his books. So the rudest man I've ever met. Not Roger Moore,
No.
Michael Winner. I could tell you a few
We could
stories
all tell
there.
stories about
my
Michael
goodness.
Winner.
He actually phoned up my office, my publishing company once, and called. In fact, Sam, who's your publisher, who's sitting with us in the studio, I don't know if he remembers this, but he rang up and called one of my female staff a
Such and
word
such.
beginning with C.
No.
And I wasn't having this.
No.
So I, in fact, I don't think I spoke to him. I think I emailed him, and it was a long email. And I said, Mr. Winner, you are a bully. You have met your match in me. I will not allow this. If you ever wish to speak to anyone in my company again, you will speak to me. You will not speak to any other members of my staff. And apparently, his PA, Diana, I've forgotten her name, isn't that terrible? She then wrote her memoir of life with Michael Winner. It's a good read it is too. And I've discovered then that he received this email, was ranting about how rude I was and all the rest of it. But then he said to her, but it's a bloody good email, isn't it? And she said it was the first time that anyone had ever stood up to him.
How interesting. He was an odd character. He was a difficult man, but he had talent.
But back to Roger Moore.
Back to Roger Moore. Now, if you could say Michael Winner was a rude man, and he was at times, Roger Moore was effortlessly polite and courteous and charming at all times. I'm sure that was your experience. Yeah. And I first met him when I was a child, when I was at my prep school. I wasn't at this school for very long. I was there, in fact, until the school was closed down, most of the staff arrested. But anyway, that's another story. But one of the nice teachers of this school was a man called Major Douch, and Major Douch taught us maths and Latin, and he'd been in the army, and his best friend in the army had been Roger Moore, then a young actor in The Saint, I think, on television. So I met him when I was 10 or 11, and he was a big television star and was charmed. But I then met him much later when I was grown up, and he discovered I wanted to be an actor, and he was quite surprised at that. He said, a stage actor? I said, no, the films, like you, Roger. He said, the films with your looks? I said, yes, with my looks. I said, and he said, well, of course, there isn't much to it. And he was always very self-deprecating. And he used to say, famously, that he only had two looks for the camera, Roger Moore, either left eyebrow up or right eyebrow up. I said, well, if it's that easy, Roger, can you teach me? And he said, I can, Giles. And so Roger Moore taught me to lift my eyebrows for the camera. And he gave me a masterclass. And if people don't believe this, go to my website, gylesbrandreth.net, and you'll find pictures of Roger Moore teaching me to lift my eyebrows. And I was very good at lifting the left eyebrow, as you can see. I could really get the left eyebrow up, but I could not get the right eyebrow up for love nor money. And I said to him eventually, I said, Roger, I can get the left eyebrow up beautifully. I cannot get the right eyebrow up. Why is it, Roger? And Roger Moore said to me, it's very simple, Giles. It's because you're half the actor that I am.
Iain Dale's Book Club.
And in terms of how it's gone down, you've had a year since the hardback came out. What's the reception been?
Well, the one that's done
I
really
think it
well.
did better than Chris and Steve's book.
Chris and
I
Steve's
didn't even
book.
know they'd done one. Those are
they-
the gay couple in Brighton.
Yeah.
Or ex-couple. He's not on it anymore, is he?
He's on with
still
his
on,
mum.
Yeah, but the other
instead.
one isn't.
Oh, the other one isn't.
I don't know if it'll do as well as Leon and June's book.
No, Leon and June's was 27 on Amazon.
Wow.
But we mustn't grumble because we've sold how many copies?
I'm not sure. I think we've sold 10,000 copies in hardback, which
And
is
it's done very well on Amazon Audio.
No, audible.com.
Oh, audible.com. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as a former publisher myself, I think you're doing very well with those kind of figures. Let's go back to the beginning. How did you meet?
Well, Giles was at Wimbledon School of Art, and I was living in a basement in Chelsea with another student. As it happened, I got hepatitis A from working in a hospital, and I was so clapped out I
I
couldn't.
thought you worked in a VD clinic.
No, it wasn't a VT
And you were
clinic.
licking the envelopes.
No, it was nutty. It was the
Oh.
Royal Marsden.
Sorry, I got that wrong.
I was
Thanks.
licking the results of blood tests
Oh,
in the
that's
Royal
right, yeah.
Marsden. But anyway, somehow, it was years ago, I got hepatitis A and I was clapped out. And my doctor said, don't work for a year. And my flatmate Camilla said, why don't you work as a model at Wimbledon School of Art?
Costume model, I must insist.
But I wasn't.
never
We
named.
didn't
We believe you.
insist
We
that at
believe
the
you.
time.
You were never...
But I did go as a costume model because it meant lying around, basically.
And then you set your cap at me.
Yeah, and then I didn't set it at you immediately because I thought you were
Because
too
you were from...
wholesome.
Because you were from Antrim in the province of Northern Ireland. You mistook me for an English aristocrat.
Giles, I didn't. I thought that you were too much like the Milky Bar Kid at first. I liked
Strong and
louche
tough.
Johnny Depp type men in those days, Keith Richards, etc. He was too wholesome, John Denvery. But then after a year in Italy, he became quite suave, didn't you? I went out to join him at Ravenna where he was doing mosaics, learning mosaics. And then we began to go out in 1980. But
Then-
he was always hilariously funny. That was what I liked.
I used to be
about him.
funny.
I used to laugh a lot.
Used
Yes,
to.
Well, then
Now
bitterness
you're just
set in.
horrified.
bitterness. Then we became bitter and twisted. But then Gogglebox saved our marriage.
Iain Dale's Book Club.
Is it a strange experience putting it all down on paper and opening up your life? Because you seem, reading the book and meeting you just for the last few minutes, you seem quite a private person, a quiet person.
Well, I think it was very difficult to write because I didn't tell a soul all the sufferings that I had during, as a child, being bullied and so on by my father and by my mates at school. And also when I was brought up a Methodist Christian, and of course Christians believe that homosexuality was an abomination to God and that you were evil. So of course, knowing what they thought, of course I never declared my homosexuality. But picking up what Barbara said, when I'd written the book, I experienced a new lease of life, freed from all the inhibitions and all the guilt and the anger and the frustration that I'd experienced during the whole of my life. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful because I don't care anymore what people think of me. This is my story, and this is how it is.
Age does that to you a bit, doesn't it? It frees you from the some of the shackles that you've had.
It does
And I
indeed,
think
yes.
It doesn't matter which generation you're in. I think that's probably the same for everybody. After a certain age, you start not to care what people think so
Well,
much.
it was still very difficult to come out. I mean, I was an accountant for 25 years, and I never told my colleagues until they found out, and then they played a terrible trick on me, which led to almost a suicide. They regarded me as, well, literally And I was so disturbed with that I planned a suicide. But in the end, my courage failed me, and I went back and told them, well, I'm leaving the firm and you can do what you like.